Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Noah was in distress and gave the name of the person who had hurt him before dying. Noah's breaths came in shallow, ragged bursts, each one scraping at his lungs like shards of glass, his body trembling as though even the smallest movement sent shockwaves of torment through him. And yet in those final, agonizing moments, as the blood pooled beneath him and the dim light of the room flickered like a cruel reminder of how fleeting life could be, his mind clung desperately to clarity, to one final purpose, one final act that would ensure the truth did not die with him. For even as the shadows around him lengthened and his vision blurred with the weight of approaching death, Noah knew that the secret he carried could not remain hidden, that the monstrous betrayal that had brought him to this end must be revealed, and so with every ounce of strength his broken body could muster, he forced his cracked lips to part, his voice no louder than a whisper yet sharp enough to cut through the thick silence, as he uttered a single name, the name of the person who had harmed him, the person whose cruelty had orchestrated his fall, the person who had turned friend into foe, loyalty into deception, and trust into a dagger plunged deep into his soul. The sound of that name hung in the air, heavy, trembling, reverberating in the minds of those who were present, for they had suspected many things but not this, never this, and now as Noah's final exhale escaped him and the light drained from his eyes, the room seemed to freeze, time seemed to fracture, and every heart that beat within those walls carried the unbearable weight of his revelation, knowing that his death was not an accident, not fate, not some cruel twist of chance, but the deliberate act of a hand that had long worn a mask of innocence.
A hand that had guided him toward ruin while smiling with the face of kinship, and as silence reclaimed the space, his whispered confession became a seed of chaos, one that would grow into storms of vengeance, justice, sorrow, and rage, because the truth he had unleashed in that final breath would not rest, it would not be silenced, it would claw its way into every corner of their world, pulling apart families, friendships, alliances, and futures, forcing each person who had heard it to grapple with the horrifying reality that someone they thought they knew was capable of orchestrating such destruction, and that Noah's blood now cried out from the ground, demanding retribution, demanding that his suffering not be in vain, and though his body was gone, his spirit lingered in the form of that single name, that damning word that would forever echo in the minds of those who bore witness, ensuring that the chain of events set into motion by his death would ripple outward endlessly, changing everything, poisoning every bond with suspicion, until the guilty party could no longer hide in shadows but would be dragged into the light by the very power of Noah's dying words, for a truth spoken at the edge of death carries a force that no denial can erase, no lie can drown, no silence can bury, and so even as Noah lay still, his voice gone, his heart stilled, his truth became immortal, a haunting legacy that would bind the living in a web of grief and fury, propelling them toward revelations they were not ready to face, toward battles they could not yet imagine, toward a reckoning that would shake their world to its very core. The silence after Noah's final breath was not the peaceful kind that comes with acceptance, but the jagged, suffocating silence of shock, the kind that presses into the lungs and refuses to let go, and every person in the room felt it differently yet with equal intensity. Victoria's wide eyes remained locked on Noah's lifeless face, her mind screaming at her to reject what she had just heard, because if she believed it, if she truly accepted that the person he had named was guilty, then her entire sense of judgment, her instincts, her faith in family, in loyalty, in blood, would crumble to dust, and Nick, standing beside her, felt fury bubbling so violently in his chest that his heart pounded like a war drum, for he had promised to protect Noah, to shield him from harm, and now the realization that someone he trusted had slipped through those defenses to strike his son down left him trembling with a helpless rage he could barely contain, while Sharon's grief took on a sound of its own, her wailing breaking the stillness as she clutched at Noah's body, rocking back and forth as though she could will him back into her arms, as though a mother's love could command death itself to return what it had taken, and in the corner, Summer's hands covered her mouth, her eyes wet with tears of disbelief, because though she had been at odds with Noah in the past, though they had argued and clashed, she never imagined she would stand here watching him die, much less hear him accuse someone they all knew, someone they all trusted, of being the architect of his destruction, and as the name Noah had spoken lingered like a phantom in the air, invisible yet deafening, the group turned inward, their gazes flitting between one another, suspicion hardening into certainty, and yet no one dared to repeat it aloud, as if saying it again would make it too real, too undeniable. But even in their silence, the truth had already begun to do its work, spreading like fire through dry brush, igniting old resentments, fueling buried doubts, until every relationship in that room suddenly felt fragile, every smile a potential mask, every word a possible lie. And though Noah's body was cooling, his spirit was roaring louder than ever through the power of that final confession, demanding justice, demanding action. And the question that now weighed on everyone's hearts was not only how could this happen, but what happens next? Because they all knew, deep down, that the revelation was a ticking time bomb, one that would explode into betrayals, confrontations, accusations, and possibly even more blood, for the person Noah had named was still out there, breathing, walking, pretending, and every second they remained free was another second of danger, another chance to strike again. And as Victoria finally tore her gaze away from Noah's body to meet Nick's burning eyes, she knew that their lives would. But as the weight of Noah's words sank deeper into the stunned silence, the room itself seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as though conspiring to trap every soul present in the suffocating truth. And while Victoria's lips quivered with the desire to deny, to scream that Noah was confused, mistaken, delirious in his pain, she could not bring herself to form the words, because deep down in the marrow of her being, in the place where instinct and intuition lived, she knew he had spoken the truth. And that knowledge hollowed her out like a flame burning through paper, leaving only ash where certainty once lived, and Nick, unable to contain the storm inside him, slammed his fist against the table with such force that the sound cracked like thunder, startling even those numb with grief, his voice raw as he demanded answers no one could provide, shouting the name aloud as though daring the guilty to reveal themselves, and the syllables slashed through the air like a blade, making Sharon flinch, making Summer sob harder, making even Chance, who had arrived moments too late to save Noah, clench his jaw as the detective in him awoke, already piecing together the puzzle, already imagining the hunt for the person who had hidden in plain sight, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And yet for all the anger, for all the heartbreak, there was still disbelief lingering like fog, because the person Noah had named was not an outsider, not a faceless stranger, but someone woven into their lives, someone who had sat at their tables, shared in their laughter, been trusted with their vulnerabilities, and that truth was a dagger twisting deeper than any physical wound, because betrayal from the outside world could be endured, could be fought, but betrayal from within cut the deepest, leaving scars that would never fully heal. And as Sharon buried her face in Noah's chest, whispering broken words of love and apologies she could never have imagined needing to say, the rest of the room fractured into hushed arguments, some insisting Noah's last words were gospel, others clinging to the desperate belief that he had been delirious, that the pain had muddled his mind. But even those voices lacked conviction, for the look in Noah's eyes before he died, the clarity, the determination, was not the look of confusion, it was the look of a man who refused to let the truth be buried. And though death had claimed him, his revelation had given birth to a new and terrible reality, one where trust had been shattered, alliances would soon splinter, and every single person present knew that the ripple effect of that whispered name would extend far beyond this room, far beyond this night, shaping the battles of tomorrow, igniting vendettas, and setting into motion a cycle of vengeance that would consume them all. Because once the truth is spoken in the final breath of the dying, it becomes immortal, it becomes untouchable, and no matter how much denial or doubt one might wrap around it, the echo remains, unrelenting, haunting, and inescapable. And now as the paramedics finally burst through the door too late to save Noah, their arrival could not stop the unraveling, for the true story had already begun, written not in ink but in blood, and the questions hanging in the air were no longer about whether the guilty would be revealed, but about how many lives would be destroyed in the process, how many hearts would be broken, how many battles would be fought, and how much darker the shadows of Genoa City would become because of one name whispered by a dying man who refused to leave this world without tearing off the mask of his betrayer. And as the paramedics' frantic movements blurred around them, dragging equipment and shouting instructions that now seemed hollow and irrelevant, Victoria's mind raced uncontrollably, every detail of her life with Noah flashing before her eyes, every smile, every argument, every secret now reframed through the lens of the betrayal he had named, and it made her stomach twist into knots of fear and disbelief, for she knew that the person Noah had accused would stop at nothing to protect themselves. and the realization that their enemy walked freely, hidden in plain sight, sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts terror and determination, and Nick, pacing back and forth, the rage inside him barely contained, clenched his jaw so tightly that his teeth ached, his fists trembling as he imagined confronting the traitor, imagining every conversation, every lie, every manipulation that must have led Noah to his death, while Sharon, still cradling Noah's body, rocked back and forth, whispering his name over and over, the sound like a mantra to anchor her grief, but every whisper also carrying the unbearable weight of his accusation, for even in her sorrow, she could not ignore the possibility that the person he had named had orchestrated all of this with cold, calculated precision, and Summer, standing slightly apart, felt the tremors of panic rise in her chest, the kind that makes it hard to breathe, the kind that makes the walls of reality feel like they are closing in, because if Noah had spoken the truth, then the web of deception around them was far more extensive than any of them had realized, and what had seemed like petty rivalries and family tensions now revealed themselves as mere fragments of a far more sinister picture, one in which the name he had whispered could tip the balance of power, loyalty, and life itself, and even chance, standing rigid, his mind racing with the instincts of someone trained to uncover the truth, could feel the gravity of the situation pressing on him like a physical weight, knowing that his next actions, the choices he made in the hours to come, could determine whether justice would be served or whether the guilty would slip into darkness once more, all while Noah's voice lingered in the room, echoing off the walls, haunting every heartbeat, whispering threats and truths that could no longer be ignored, and slowly, inexorably, suspicion began to spread among those who had gathered, glances exchanged. With subtle accusation, murmurs that started as disbelief evolving into arguments, eyes narrowing at longtime friends and allies, questioning their motives.